It's Techo Tuesdays, where I try to teach you about certain technologies that we have around the world that we probably use every day, and some of which we may not use every day because I'll probably run out of stuff to talk about. But I'll probably use it every day, we'll probably take it for granted. But I'd like for us to understand better the world around us, the things we use every day, the things we interact with, the things we see, where they come from, how they work, and why. And this should help us perhaps progress them, develop further, and perhaps make the world a better place because that's what I'm about. What we're talking about today is very popular, not popular, it's everywhere. It's so common. Common and popular are different, aren't they? It's so common, but it's not so popular. It's so underrated. We don't really talk about it. We don't really think about it. But almost all of us in all our lives and every day use this thing that I'm going to talk about today. We have it in our washing machines, our microwave ovens, our blenders, our clippers for shaving our hair dryers, fans, those fan things in the roof, whatever they call those. Are they just fans? Fan heaters, air conditioning. You go into cars, you have them in your air conditioning again, in your cooling system, in your adjustments, your electric windows. You look at industry in farms, you have them in factories, you have a lot of them, conveyor belts and all that stuff. Yeah, certain cars, let me say vehicles rather, that are driven by these things. And these are electric motors. Now, an electric motor is a machine that converts electrical energy into mechanical energy. And these are found everywhere. Our laptops, and I can go on and on about where we find them. But essentially, what you have is you get you put in electricity, but then what you get out of it is rotational motion. Now, how does this work? Electric motors take advantage of the electromagnetic principle, which states that if you have current within a wire or a conductor, if you have electricity within a conductor, it you then get a magnetic field around it. So, because you understand that magnets have a magnetic field around them, just sort of like you can kind of think of it like when you stink. I think I've said this before somewhere. When you stink or you smell good, there's like a field around you where people can smell it, but then as you go further, you don't really smell it. So you can think about it like that, kind of in a way. So the magnet, if they are far apart, perhaps they don't interact. But the closer you bring them, depending on the orientation of the poles, they'll either attract or repel. So we figured out that if you have electricity in a wire or in a current, you also have this magnetic field, and that also interacts with magnets. So throughout the 1700s, late 1700s, we were really trying to experiment and trying to figure this thing out. And in 1820, we had the first successful experiment that actually helped us harness this or take advantage or actually understand this phenomenon and this interaction between electricity, conductive material, and magnets and magnetic fields. So what this person created was an experiment where they had a coil of conductor, and that was electrocuted. And within that, he had placed a magnet that is free to rotate about a point in the center. And when you electrocuted that, the magnet actually spin in a certain direction. From there on, we did a lot of experiments, a lot of development until today, where we have motors everywhere. And essentially, the way we've designed them now is that you have the coil, coil. That is the stuff that you electrocute, and then you'll have around it or inside of it or whichever um, orientation that works best for their use, that is able to rotate around this, and it rotates freely. It's not even it doesn't have to be in contact, just as long as it's around it. The magnetic field around it interact. The magnetic field of the coil, the electrocuted coil, will interact with the magnetic field of the magnet, and that would allow for the rotational movement that you can then take advantage of, connect a shaft to that and take advantage of to use in any rotational motion that you desire. Again, your washing machines, your hair dryers, so on and so on. So electric motors are so prevalent in everyday life. I mean, when you go to a building and you're trying to go to the 15th floor, and maybe you have a big bag with you or have carrying a bed, you're just moving in. Taking the stairs is crazy. So you're gonna take the elevator. That elevator itself is pulled up there by an electric motor. These things are so powerful, they're able to lift us up. But at the same time, they're so light, you can have one in your laptop. You can have a very small one in your laptop, which just cools down your 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 computer, because as your computer is working, it's generating a lot of heat, and you need to dissipate that heat somehow. Yes, these days a lot of laptops just use heat exchangers, but we used to mostly use a fan to help cool down and just dissipate the heat. And they can be so small and they can go on to be big. Like I said, the one in your laptop is pretty small, the one in your clippers is probably very small, the one you have in your hair dryer maybe a little bigger, but really still small. You go and look at the one that you'd have in your you'll have in your washing machine. That'll be much bigger because that now has to handle much bigger loads. If you go into your car, cars have a lot of electric motors, especially the higher end cars. They have a lot of electric motors because almost everything is just a touch and things work. If you're going to want to adjust your seating, you just press a button and then things move. There's a motor for that. You press a button and your seat reclines. There's a motor for that. You press a button, the window closes or opens. There's a motor for that. You press a button and you adjust the steering wheel. There's a motor that does that. You have your windscreen wipers. There's a motor that does that. It's just that it doesn't do the rotational motion. You connect it to a certain actuator that only takes advantage of certain movements and not the entire rotational movement. So it only allows it to go back and forth, or else your wipers would be going all around in circles and that would be crazy. But that's how we take advantage of motors. Your radiator is blown into by a fan, which is powered by an electric motor. Steering, electrically assisted power steering, is done by an electric motor. You also do have pneumatic power steering, which is done by something completely different. But you also do have electrical power steering, which is done by an electric motor. I think the most important motor that you have in your car is the one that helps you start the car. When you turn the key or when you press the button and it goes like, vroom, that is an electric motor. That part, that is an electric motor that gets the engine rotating and then allows it to continue. An engine by itself, an internal combustion engine by itself, is not able to go from zero and just get starting and get rotating. It needs assistance. That's why sometimes when your battery is finished, you just get someone to push it for you, to push your cars for you, and it has to be in gear, and then you have to sort of trick it, especially if it's manual. I don't think you can do that with automatic. You sort of trick it. You actually, what you're doing is you're inducing motion into the engine. So you're making the engine be moving, and then it continues to move, because on itself from zero it cannot move. That's why you need a battery or some power source to be able to start your engine, because you need the power from the battery or the power source to power the electric motor, which then gives you motion, which then allows you to have your motion that your engine and the firing and the petrol and the air mixture can then sustain. And again, there it is, everyday product that you probably use every single day, but you did not realize there's a motor in there. Your water that you drink from the taps doesn't come from the dam that you have just outside of you, or the river that you go and get from a bucket. It comes from very far, and it comes up to your house, even if your house is up the hill. There are pumps that are used to pump that water up. That pump uses an electric motor. I think I spoke about elevators, how they're driven by electric motors. If you go to the not arcade, but even those would be too, where you have roller coasters, theme park, that's the word. If you go to a theme park and you're riding on these roller coasters and all these things, those things are powered by electric motors. Electric motors are everywhere. The gate, when you get into your house and you press the button and the gate slides open like that, there's an electric motor that is in that box at the bottom that shifts your gate to open. If you go into a mall and there's a boom and you get your ticket there and the boom opens, there's an electric motor in there that operates that boom, unless there's a guy, which you get in certain places where there's a guy who does that thing. Instead of having the guy doing that, you can have an electric motor do it for you. When you're getting that ticket, where you're putting in that ticket, that thing that puts the ticket in and then takes it out or whatever, though there are motors in there that help do that. I think I spoke about computers, I spoke about fans. there's a myriad of uses. Uses is not the word I was looking for. This English stuff keeps running away from me, but I don't know what I'm talking about. So maybe those English stuff just doesn't exist. But there's a lot of uses, I think applications is the word I was looking for. There's a lot of applications for electric motors, and we use these every day, but we just take them for granted. And we probably take them for granted because there's nothing very interesting about them. It's kind of like oxygen. How oxygen is so important that we simply cannot live without it. But like it's whatever, man. It's oxygen. It's there. It's there. You just breathe. You don't even have to think about breathing. You can sleep and you'll be breathing in the oxygen and breathing it out. Like it's there. You know, it's so chilled. So the same thing happens with electric motors. They're there. They're everywhere, but we don't really think about them and how important they are to our everyday lives. We're now moving into a world where we have drones. We're moving into a world where things are starting to become more electrified. We are going to see more and more motors. Well, we're not going to see them because normally they work in the background and they're hidden, but we're going to have them more and more becoming a part of our lives. And that is quite interesting for me, at least. So you have drones, which are going to have them. A lot of car manufacturers are also moving towards electric cars. And what those do is that instead of having your engine, which uses petrol to give you motion, you have a battery which uses electricity to give a motor power, which then gives your wheels motion. So again, it's an electric motor that's going to work there. We're having a lot of e-bikes, which is bicycles or motorbikes. Doesn't motorbike make it a? Oh, but it's motor. English. Or bikes, whatever bike type it is, that uses electric motors instead of engines. Trains use electric motors. You have the electricity that they get from, that stuff up there, and then inside of them they use electric motors. And the great thing about electric motors uh, over engines, internal combustion engines, is that you're able to have torque, which is what gives you the power to move. You're able to have torque from a very low RPM, which is rotation per minute. From a very low rotation per minute, actually from standstill, you're able to have all of the torque that you need to get moving. And that's where internal combustion struggle. The only reason really we keep on using engines is because we use fuel and people make money from fuel and they want us to keep using them. But really, that's about it. I mean, yeah, sure, there are other technical limitations, but essentially that's mainly the big one. But electric motors are quite important and they're getting more and more prevalent in everyday society. And with us moving to them, all our cars are going to be driven by electric motors now. Again, the drones that are going to form a big part of our world are going to use electric motors. I'm trying to think of something important that I thought I should share, but I don't remember. I think maybe let me close off by saying that if you have an electric motor, so think about it this way: if you take your fan and you remove that thing, that grill that protects you from getting your fingers shredded, if you actually spin your fan yourself, actually probably better in the opposite direction. If you spin it very fast enough, you should be able to get electricity on the opposite end of the cable, because the way the electromagnetic principle works is that if you have electricity in a conductor that is interacting with a magnet, then you have motion. Sorry, yes, if you have electricity in a conductor in a magnetic field, you'll have magnetic field induced in here that will then induce a motion here in the magnet, which will then cause motion there. But if you don't have electricity that side and you start spinning this real fast, you start having the motion in your magnet, which, because it's moving in relation to this coil, you now induce an electric charge into that wire. So now you'll have electricity there. And that is essentially how hydroelectricity works. That is how, these big wind turbines that generate electricity, that is essentially how they work. You have the same type of thing, not exactly the same type of thing, but you're rotating it and then you're getting electricity on the other hand. That is pretty much how it works. And that is just about all I have to say about electric motors. Maybe, if I had people asking me questions, I'd be able to answer them, or maybe I'd struggle and just tell you guys to go to Google. But that is all for Techo Tuesdays, Technology Tuesdays this week. I hope I was able to add some value. I really feel like there's something I'm forgetting, but that's pretty much what motors are. That is how they work. And thank you so much for tuning in.